Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to be talking about the Face API under Microsoft's cognitive services. So when you think of the Face API, there are different components or different features under the Face API. Number one is face detection. So if you watch those movies, it's basically that artificial intelligence, that square bracket that detects a human image's face. Number two is verification. Verification is very simple. You provide two images, and that feature is going to tell you yes or no, this is a match. The third thing is similarities. There's a similarities functionality, and it's just going to tell you that given a face, whether it can find matches within a set of different faces. Another feature that's very similar to that is identification. Same, you give it an image, but with this one, you're using groupings. You have a group of faces. A group of one person's face can have like 20 different faces. You're just trying to search and find a match within that group. That kind of comes what today's tutorial is going to be about. I'm going to show you guys how to create groups of faces and train your Face API to recognize a person. So let's say we have an individual called Christina. We're gonna add like different variations of Christina's faces. So let's say the different factors that happen in real life. It could be I gained weight. It could be I got older. It could be I lost weight. There are different factors that could make a face identification or a face match not come out accurate. Once you have a group full of image, how to train your model using machine learning for it to learn how, let's say, Christina's face looks like. Then eventually we're going to use the identification API to test a given image against this group to see if it'll come up with a match. And it'll come up with a confidence level between 0 and 1. You know that, yeah, it's going to be a positive match the higher the number it goes. So in this tutorial, we'll be showing stuff like that. At the end of the video, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Then at the end, if you have any questions or anything, let me know. I'll also include a link to the GitHub source code at the end as well. So for this tutorial, what you need is the Face API and also the Blob Storage. So under the Microsoft portal, click on the plus sign and scroll down to AI and Cognitive Services and select Face API. Then also to create the storage, click on Storage, then Storage Account. From there, you're going to follow the steps. It's pretty intuitive to create both services. As you can see, I already created the two services for this tutorial. Next, do a search on Azure Face API and click on Enter. Scroll down to Face API and facial recognition software. Click on that. Then for the Face API, click on API reference. And what this page does is it shows you all the methods are available under the Face API. For this tutorial, we're going to be concentrating on identify. Click on expand the person group. We're going to be using create person group and also train person group. Then under persons, we're going to be creating a person and adding faces to the person. Then for each method, one thing I like is at the bottom of the page, they have sample code for each language that you choose. So now let's go to Eclipse. For this project, I'm using Spring Boot.
So as you can see, Spring already generated an application main file. This is what's gonna entry point to kick off and start this project. So let's go to the controller class. For the controller class is basically a middle person to grab all the requests from the web UI to the business tier. So for the get method for create a group, let's look at the group form. All a user would be doing is entering the name. So let's start the application to kind of have a sense of what this application is doing. And actually, let's go back to the controller and grab the path we're going to use to bring up the group form. So it's called person group add. So now we're going to launch a web browser. And paste in the path in your local host and click on enter. For the group name, I'm going to give it my friends as the name of the person group. Click on submit, and it looks like it was able to successfully create my group. So let's see what's going on in the back end. When a user posts the form, the very first thing it did was, as you can see, the request param, it grabbed the name. So once it grabbed the name of the group, we're gonna call the method that I created for create person group. And basically, we're passing in the name of the group. The next thing is pretty standard when you're calling. Spring provides something called REST template for whenever you're calling uh, REST API. And basically, what you do is specify the heading, and in our case, we need to specify a key for the Face API. Here's the key for my API that I created on the Azure portal. So let's go to the Azure portal, and initially when you created your API service, you should have had this. So click on the keys, and that's where you copy the key and paste it back to your application. So the next thing after you specify your key is the actual request body. For this example, we're passing in the name, the user data, I just gave anything. Then populate the HTTP entity, which takes the body and the header. Then the next thing is the actual Face API path that you need to call for to create a group for Azure. And the rest is pretty straightforward if you're using Spring. You pass the header. In our case, we're using a put method. And the return class is of type string. So once that's executed, the name of the group would be returned. And we pass into the redirect attributes and return it back to the form that called it. So as you can see, the name of the group was returned once we pass it into that. The next thing we're going to do is create the actual person now that we've had a group. So for the person, let's scroll down to the get method. So for the get method, in order to create a person, you need a group ID, the one that you just created. So we're going to pass a group ID to this person form. So let's copy the group name. and enter the path to add a person. So for this person that we're creating under a group, we're going to call it Kenya and click on Submit. So if you see, it creates a unique identifier for a person. So this one we need to store for other subsequent calls that we're going to be making. So copy into a notepad. Now let's get back to Eclipse and see what's going on in the background. So to add a person, as you can see, like I mentioned, we passed in the group ID. The next thing is we provided the name Kenya, which is what's under the request param. Then the next thing we're doing is calling create person. So for create person, we need both the group ID and the name of the person. So I'm populating the group name, the person's name. Then the rest of the code should look similar. For Spring, we're still using the REST template to call a REST API, so nothing is really going to change. The only thing that's going to change is, if you notice, the request parameter is different. That's what we entered for the user data. The headers is pretty much the same. We're still using the API key. Then this part is different. So to create a person, we use this URL, persons group, then specify the group name, then uptype persons. You already specify the name of the person in the body, so you don't need to pass that parameter. So the next thing is actually executing this REST call. This one is a post, and the return type is a string. So if you notice, it's a string JSON. So to parse a JSON file, we look for the field called person ID. Once we parse out the person ID, this function is going to return the person ID back to the controller. So the controller is responsible for returning that information back to the user interface, which in our case is going to be this person form. And that's the success message that we saw on the screen. So that was what the person ID was. The next thing is adding the person's face. So let's go back to Eclipse. So we're going to scroll down to the person's face, the add URL. And for this one, we need both the group and the person ID for the person that we're going to be adding the face to. So to call the upload form for this person, we just need to pass those two parameters. So let's kind of take a look at what the file needs. The HTML. It's going to need the name of the person. For this one, I'm adding a count because it's going to be multiple faces for one person. Then the URL, that's going to be the actual file, image file that you're uploading. So let's test that out for person add face. It requires both the group and the person ID, so I'm going to copy that and paste it into the person add. And there's a form that I was just talking about. We give it the person name Kenya still. Then for this one, I'm going to give it a count of 100 and upload the first person's face. Hit upload, and it looked like it uploaded the first image successfully. Then let's do the same for the same person for 3 more faces, since we're going to train this model to be able to recognize all the different variations of this individual's face. So that's a second image. Okay, it generated another unique identifier for that face. So for the same individual, let's add the third unique image. So we're going to browse and add another one. And we're going to upload. And that one also generated a unique ID. Then the final one, we're going to give it a counter of 104. Looks like I'm running out of images. Oh, there's one more. Okay. Then let's upload that. Okay, so now that we're done uploading and generating the different Face API, IDs, let's go back to the backend and figure out what's going on. So as you can see, we pass in the URL file, the name of the person, the group name, the person's ID, the counter, and redirect attributes is only when you want to return a message back to the user. So for this one, since we have a lot of parameters to pass into a method, I created a simple POJO object that I'll populate and pass into this method instead of passing like 20 different parameters. So the very first thing we're going to do is store the image. So we'll call the store. And this is where the blob storage that you created initially comes in handy. So let's take a look at the storage account. Go under keys. Then if you notice there's a connection string. In order to use a blob storage and be able to have access to a blob storage, you need this URL. So that's why we're copying and pasting our code that handles all the connections to our blob storage. And the container name, if you notice, is photos. So let's go to browse blobs, and as you can see, photos is there as a container. So that's where all the different images that we uploaded we're actually storing. So this is basically the different steps that you go through if you need to upload an image into a blob storage. So this one, you can look at the code afterwards, since our tutorial is concentrating on training images. I won't go into details. So now that the image is stored, the blob storage returned the URL. So now we're going to call the add person's face with that URL from the blob storage and the rest of the data. So once again, I'm generating a unique key. And the reason why I'm doing this is when you're doing a search on your URL in the blob storage, you need to know which URL identifies with which unique persistence key from the Face API. So for this one, we're calling the API to add a face. So in order to do that, you need to provide the group, the person ID, and also the URL path that you just uploaded. Then the rest is pretty much the same as the other APIs for Spring. And also for this one is passing in returning a JSON object. So we need to parse out the persistence face ID, which is coming from the JSON object. So for this one, I need to store this unique key along with the URL in the blob. So let's say I need to search for a unique face. The cool thing about blob storage is it's not just you storing an image. You have the ability to store metadata along with that image as well. So this is what it's basically doing. It's first passing in the URL, looping through the URLs, doing a search to find, okay, for this image, find the blob that contains this image. Then it's a hash key. So the key was the image 0001 or 002. Then the value was the persistence ID that came back from the API. So basically what I'm doing is just uploading that into the blob storage. So that was basically setting the blob metadata. And like I mentioned, yeah. So let's get back to the API. And the next thing we need to do now that we have all the images for this person uploaded, we need to train train the faces. So it also needs the group name and the person's name. So if you notice, these are all the images that I uploaded for Kenya. And there's also a train button. So when somebody, for displaying, I just went and grabbed those images using the group ID and the person ID. So in order to display that initial form for the train, I called the get person API, and basically you pass in the group name and the person ID, and that's a path you need to specify. The rest is pretty much the same for Spring, and it returns a JSON object. So we can go back. So once it returns the JSON object, all I'm doing is just iterating through that JSON object and finding the name of the person, finding the persistence ID, and once I have the persistence ID, I'm going to use that to go back to the blob storage and find out what the URL is for that particular persistence ID. So that's why we're calling get blob metadata using that key and the value. So it's going to go through, iterate through all the blobs, and basically it's going to be searching for blobs that have that key and also contain that value. So for blobs, not only can you do the search on a particular image name or URL, you can add like a whole bunch of characteristics to an image and be able to search for it. So that's an awesome utility that I was able to leverage for this tutorial. So once you grab all that information, you're able to find the unique thumbnail for a particular image. So all I'm doing is I need to display this information on the user HTML page, the UI. So once I grab the information that I need to pass it into this DTO, data transfer object, then add it into an array list, then send it back to the train.html. So let's look at the train.html. So if you notice the train.html, there's the name I gave that return object was person faces. That's our array list. And basically you're iterating through the list and grabbing the group, the person name, and the thumbnail. And that's basically what's being displayed here. Okay. So now we're going to click on train group. So all these images that we uploaded, once you click on train group, that's a asynchronous process. And what you need is, in order to train the group, is a group name. I mean the group ID and the person ID. For this one, I have a function that calls train person group, and I pass it the group ID. And basically follow the same steps as before. If you are starting to notice a pattern, calling a REST API in Spring is pretty much standard. Once you provide the key or the headers, the only thing that changes is the path of what API you're calling and whether it's a post, get, or a put. So as I mentioned, we did call that class, but it doesn't return any output because it's an asynchronous process. So what it's doing in the background is using machine learning to train the images to recognize that, okay, Kenya here, there are different variations of her image. So the next thing we're going to do is the fun part. See if we can identify giving a unique image, whether our code is going to be able to identify Kenya. So for identify, we're just passing in the group and the person ID. So let's look at upload unknown face form. So I have two columns. One is the unknown, one is the group. For the unknown is basically a form that you upload an image. And for the known, you basically display the image that you just uploaded and the confidence level. So let's try it out. And let's pick an image that Kenya's inside. Upload. So that's one thing I like about this functionality. You can train somebody, but if they exist in a group of people, this API is still going to be able to find it. So if you can see, this is a positive identification. So with machine learning, if you do a search and you're trying to match and it returns a score. The score is usually between 0 and 1. So in this case, anything above zero point 0.5 is positive. So it was able to identify who Kenya was. For the other girl that's next to her, if you notice for her face um, ID, it was not able to find anything. So let's look at Kenya's information. As you can see, in order to call the identification, first you need to call the detect. And the detect is basically bringing parameters because the machine is learning the different dimensions and positions of somebody's eyes, their lips, um, their nose, their mouth, all of that. They're different points that machine learns, and that's how they can be able to uniquely identify one individual from another. Another good thing I like about this API is it will be able to tell that yes, this person is female. Um, do they have facial hair? Are they wearing glasses? Um, are they happy? It shows a number 1. So that's a 0 between 0 and 1 that I was telling you about. So it has a 100% confidence that the person is smiling and happy. Um, then the hair color, yep, Kenya does have black hair. So it has a 1 confidence. Brown, yeah. So let's look at the girl next to Kenya and see what attributes when we call the detect, it was able to detect. So all of this information, if you um, look at the dimensions, well, let's see. Yeah, it shows us she's a female. It will show whether she has makeup or not. It shows her hair color is brown. It's 99% sure that's brown. Then the confidence level that's black or blonde gets lower and lower. Um, yeah, so that's basically what the detect does. And this concludes this tutorial.